We stand for the true and north, the cities and skylines, the strong and free. For those who value the story and source, the opinion and fact, the context and clarity to help illuminate the path and potential, the drive and direction. We are the one and only, the Globe and Mail. What shapes your world?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Silikoff, Technology and Life Sciences reporter with the Globe and Mail. I'd like to welcome all of you here in the room today, and for those watching the live stream across Canada, to Road to Net Zero, Building Resilient Businesses in a Changing Climate. I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinabeg, the Haudenosaunee Shawnee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to gather and to learn here today. Over the next couple of hours, we'll dive into insights about the state of sustainability efforts in Canada and strategies for business leaders who are navigating the complexities of climate action. If you're joining us in person here today, I invite you to stay for some refreshments and networking after the session. I'd also like to take this moment to thank our presenting sponsor, Toyota, for helping us make today's event possible. We are pleased to have a representative from Toyota joining our program, along with other speakers who are sharing their views independently. With that, let's kick off our first conversation. I'm thrilled to welcome Dax Da Silva, founder and CEO of Montreal software company Lightspeed Commerce, to talk about the role of businesses in protecting nature and his own transformative journey to the world's wildest places. Okay, can you hear me? Good. Thanks, Dax.
Thanks, Sean.
So before we get started, for those in the room today, Dax and his team have kindly provided a copy of his latest book, Echoes from Eden. You can see it here for each of you. I've been to conferences where they hand out books, and unlike most of those, this is a great read. It's a page turner. I urge all of you to read it. So Echoes from Eden, Dax, is a very different book from your first one, Age of Union, which was a call to action for people to become change makers. It's a gripping, immersive look at some of the conservation projects Dax funded with $40 million of his own money after he stepped down as CEO of Lightspeed in 2022. Dax even visited the projects and people doing the work to protect fragile ecosystems in places like the Amazon, the Congo, and Borneo against poaching, trawling, slashing and burning, and illegal mining. Along the way, he encountered snakes, vampire bats, tarantulas, and piranhas, and wrestled the caiman, which is like a little alligator. And that's just in the first chapter. Dax worked with conservation champions, including Jane Goodall, the late Jane Goodall, and the Rewild organization co-founded by Leonardo DiCaprio, and co-produced films about the projects, one of which won an Emmy, and another called Yanuni, we'll talk about that in a bit, which was longlisted for an Oscar this year. So let's dig in. Dax, you've been a conservationist since your teens, when you protested against old-growth logging in Clayoquot Sound in British Columbia, which is where you grew up. What compelled you back then to get involved?
Yeah, so it was one of those things where, you grow up, my parents were refugees from Africa, you grow up around all this majestic nature in BC, and you start to see, in the news all of this clear cutting that was happening. And so I joined the protests at Clayoquot Sound. 1,000-year-old trees that stood like cathedrals were being destroyed, and we were able to save Clayoquot Sound. It was collective action. It was a young activist, Sephora Berman, 23 years old. This incredible call to action. We saved it, but it was the drive to Clayoquot Sound that also showed me a lesson about how much we can destroy. It was hours and hours of clear-cut moonscape. So while we were, the collective action allowed us to save it. It just showed me how much we can destroy. So that turned me into a conservationist, even though I was already on this path to building software. Since I was a teen, my dream was to create a software company.
Even back then, wow.
Yeah.
So you vowed to devote time and money to conservation efforts once you had the means, and
That's right.
then you had the means. Tell us how and when that plan started to take shape for you in your career.
Yeah, so the first book, Age of Union, was actually just me organizing my thoughts in terms of my perspective on nature. how human culture has to adapt, how spiritually there's a journey we have to go on before we can start to think about the oneness of everything, as opposed to just our immediate needs or the things in the human world. And so that was a bit of philosophy. This book is very different because and the conservation projects are. The book is a result of the conservation projects. So the conservation projects, when I stepped down as CEO and became the chair of Lightspeed, that's when I made the investment. But for me, it wasn't enough to just write the check. It was more important for me to go to these places and see, what does it take to save a species? What does it take to fight on the front lines? I wanted to get to know these folks on the ground. They for me, they struck me as like startups. Having Lightspeed been a startup, I wanted to be on the ground with them and not to just try to have all the solutions. I was there to learn in a humble way, to really understand what they were up against, because every place has a different social, economic, political context. Even the Amazon and Borneo have maybe some similarities in the ecosystem. It's a totally different situation. So this book is really an account of each one of those adventures.
Is it fairly common or uncommon for benefactors to actually go to the ground, go deep into the jungle to actually see where their money is being spent and the kind of impact it's having?
I feel like it isn't that common, but I do recommend it because there isn't anything about any of these projects that I understood from the website or the PDF. In fact, when I went to DR Congo, it's a very complex project. In the end, it saved over 1 million hectares and had them in forest land titles in a very war-torn part of the world. You can't even access it anymore. It's actually a project started by Dr. Carrie Bowman here at the University of Toronto. And I didn't understand a thing about how complex the project was. In order to save gorillas, you really had to uplift communities and uplift the status of women in order for the forest to remain intact, because people that were in poverty were taking trees out of the forest, the protected forest, for charcoal, etc. And so they're all very complex scenarios, and you have to go to really understand, what it takes.
And the idea of not just, again, writing a check and supporting a conservation startup, as you call it quite eloquently, but the idea of writing a book and funding movies and shows. Again, was that just something that was born from your mind, or did you have advice on that? Like that, tell us a little bit about that kind of multimedia approach.
Yeah, I think early on I realized how difficult it was to get to these places, and I also realized that some of the access that we had through the conservationists they weren't places people could access ordinarily. So we started to take camera crews just to do some short films on some of these adventures so we could share them. And then I started to also meet filmmakers. Some of the camera crews we hired are in the process of making films. And so I got involved with some longer features, and the first was Wildcat. And Wildcat was the film that was shot in the Amazon near our very first investment in the Jungle Keepers project, which is run by an amazing conservationist named Paul Rosalie, and Trevor Frost, and that team. They were doing a short film, me meeting Paul, but this Wildcat movie was incredible. They needed money to help finish editing it. I got involved with their team, and that was the Emmy winner. And that allowed me to meet other groups of just the best conservationist filmmakers, like Richard Latkani, who I've now done 2 movies with. And I think it's important to have the storytelling aspect, to have the awareness raising aspect of a film, and short films on YouTube as well, not just the longer features. You can reach millions of people, because the on-the-ground work is important, but you need the cover of awareness for people to care about something, so that there's political will to do something about these places. That's so important to the solution.
And you also need to find these characters. Like, again, startup, you understand what it takes to be a startup entrepreneur. Usually, basically kind of swimming upstream hard and then swimming harder and trying not to fail every step of the way. And I think that's one of the interesting things about the book is when you meet these characters, it's not like just write a check and conservation happens. You need someone who's a really tough and can put up with disease and setbacks and poachers and that sort of thing. What would you say about how would you characterize some of these people? And again, it's well and good for us to write a nice check to the World Wildlife Fund, but what does it take in terms of the leaders on the ground to make that happen?
Yeah, so the subtitle of the first book, Age of Union, was Igniting the Changemaker. And I would say that how we picked these projects was there was this changemaker at the core of each of these projects. So the book is not about me. Of course, it's about you getting a laugh at me struggling in these jungles, but it's really about these heroes. And I think that what's special about them is not only are they doing something just incredible at a level of self-sacrifice that I think many of us couldn't comprehend, they're just also doing it from such a spiritual place, such a pure place, from a perspective that I think we can all learn from. But I think the greatest lesson that they can teach us is how much individuals can actually move the needle, because I think that is, in this world where everything seems so much bigger than us, and a lot of things seem hopeless, whether it's political or social or certainly environmental these days, individuals can make such a tremendous difference. And that's the inspiration that I want folks to take from these stories, whether it's Paul Watson, who started Sea Shepherd, that saved whales in general from extinction in the oceans over the course of 50 years after us whaling them to almost nothing in 400 years. To Paul Rosalie, to Juma, like these people show you what individuals can do.
Let's talk a little bit about Juma. We meet her in Echoes from Eden, and she's basically the star of the movie Yanuni, which is fantastic. Saw it recently with you, actually. We meet Juma, leader in the Amazon, and you describe her as both regal and rooted, but also a badass, who fights for her homeland while navigating the complex corridors of government and international activism. Tell us a little bit about her story and what we can learn from her achievements and some of her setbacks, and also personal struggles in this role.
Yeah, and the movie's still in festivals, so I can't share it with everybody quite yet, but soon, hopefully, will be available on streaming. But yeah, Yanuni is really the story of Juma's fight for the Amazon, and she's a young Indigenous chief in Chipaya territory, deep in the Amazon, and she's had a price on her head since she was a teenager, which was fighting against the dams that were being created, the Belamonte Dam, and at the beginning of the movie, she said, I know I'm going to live a life of struggle, with a smile on her face. I mean, she's just such a strong, incredible woman, and what the movie takes us through a little bit of her journey as she becomes the Secretary of Indigenous Rights when Lula displaces Bolsonaro. But there's so many forces in the country fighting against that, especially in these regions where there's Indigenous territory. And so what's happening in those areas is the rivers are being poisoned on purpose with this illegal gold mining activity. They mix mercury and cyanide with the sediment of the river. They suck up the river, and to separate out the gold, they throw all of that back in the river, and it kills the indigenous people and the animals and the fish. And that's just phase one of pulling out all the timber, burning it down, and then converting it to farmland for cattle, for beef. So that's the fight. It's pretty gripping. And then the other part of her story of that movie is partway you discover that her partner, who's not Indigenous, Hugo, is actually fighting from a different perspective. He's coming in on helicopters with a paramilitary force called Ibama, which was sidelined by Bolsonaro, but not completely shut down. And they're going in and blowing up the illegal gold mines. And partway through the movie, you discover she's pregnant. And so you're worried for this newborn after all of the poisoning you've seen of these rivers. So it's a love story. It's high. It turns into an action thriller at points. So it really is their life. Like, you get a real sense of what it really takes to be an Indigenous activist on the front line.
There's a scene in that movie. It's more thrilling than any action adventure I've ever seen, and it's real life, and people could die if things don't.
People think it's a scripted movie.
Right. It's highly recommended when you have a chance. Obviously, there's been big political changes in Brazil since Bolsonaro was voted out and then convicted for conspiracy and jailed. But what has actually changed in terms of the issues facing deforestation and pollution of the Amazon basin? Is this just continuing, or are we actually seeing any improvements?
I think that deforestation has slowed a lot under Lula. There have been some positive things that have happened. But I was just speaking with activists from Ecuador the other day, and there's a lot of oil extraction happening, even in some countries that are very progressive. Oil rights have been sold. The illegal gold mining is very, very, very painful to see in the Amazon. I flew over it with Dr. Jane Goodall, and it's just horrifying. And there's not more gold in those rivers than our rivers. It's just because there are so many rivers in the Amazon system, and they're so remote, and that these folks can get away with it, and Bolsonaro was actively promoting it to crack open the Amazon and to kill off the indigenous people so that they could convert it to agricultural purposes that actually won't work in the Amazon. So they keep destroying areas and then have to move on to another area because it doesn't work, doesn't last. So it's sad, and it leaves basically desertification. There's areas that we show in the movie that are desert and will never be forest again.
Yeah, it's hard to watch parts of the film, but it's important. So you and DiCaprio got to introduce Yanuni at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York last year. There's a passage in your book I'd love if you could read, because it's very powerful. It's on page 348. I set the page for you there, if you don't mind.
Watching Juma that night, I was reminded that the Amazon doesn't stand because of outside intervention. It stands because of indigenous resistance. Juma and others like her don't protect these forests only for their own people. They protect them for the world, because we all depend on them. These leaders are the line between balance and collapse. We owe them more than admiration. We owe them our attention, our alliance, and our action.
Very powerful. So what can the average person in Canada do to help these efforts in the Amazon and the Congo, elsewhere?
I think that there's quite a lot you can do. There's a lot of really great organizations. There's Juma's Institute, of course. Jungle Keepers in the Peruvian Amazon, we've been working with them from the beginning. They need a lot of support. We've gotten 130,000 acres protected there from zero. If we can get to 300,000, Peru will turn it into a national park. This is an area that's like, from this one treehouse that they've built, you can see every corner of that treehouse. You can see protected forest for as far as the eye can see. So these efforts, these grassroots efforts, are maybe require a little bit of research on the internet, or just take a look at some of the projects that we've researched and supported. But it's also, I think, down to some consumer behavior. It's researching the products you buy, the choices that we make day to day. I think we think that we can't do anything, but if we can get a little bit out of autopilot on some of the choices we make, I think even the smallest efforts can feel rewarding and encourage us to do more. And that was a lot. I explored that a little bit in the first book, which is a free download if folks want to get some ideas.
Okay. And you met and got to know Jane Goodall before she passed away. What was she like? What did you learn from her?
It's a huge privilege. We just announced that also with DiCaprio, we're going to be launching a new film on Jane's last 2 years. She passed last October, but in the last 2 years that we were filming, I got to travel with her to the Amazon for 3 weeks, as well as Africa, to Tanzania and to Gombe, where she started. I mean, traveling with Jane is just, I think, the privilege of a lifetime. I think you learn about what an individual can do, and in I think the highest sense, because she truly, what you get from that movie, and it's a very personal movie that Richard's crafted with this film called Just Me, Jane. Less about the icon, more about the person, and you learn how much she prioritized the message and learned how to leverage the icon, but at great personal cost, as you learn through the movie. And I think that is so inspiring to see somebody be so focused on something bigger than themselves, something that she's doing for all of us. She's doing for animals, and I think there was a humility to it. I think Jane saw a fly and an elephant the same. She saw a regular person and a celebrity the same, and that is, I think, just a level of understanding what's important and understanding the importance of everything, and the priority that we have to put on that oneness, and considering nature as a part of something that we are a part of and not separate from.
So when you stand back and look at your conservation efforts so far, do you feel they've brought the attention, impact, and change you hoped for? What's surprised you on the positive and maybe also on the negative?
I think what one thing that I like to remind people, that it's something that I've learned, maybe people wouldn't know this, but investing in startups, because I've done my fair share of investing in startups versus investing in a conservation project, you will never lose money on nature. Because when you partner with nature, there's almost never a total loss. It can always come back. It can always resurge. A lot of the projects that Age of Union supported were in Canada, not where we're protecting pristine nature, but where we're working with Indigenous groups to restore something, to reflow a river that was destroyed from logging, and we did that with the Katzie First Nations in BC. There's no investment that you can make in conservation that's not going to create an incredible legacy for multiple generations of people and for wildlife. And there's just never a loss. When you partner with nature, it always resurges.
I love that. Never lose money on nature. That's great. You write in the book that when you stepped down as CEO in 2022, you wanted to devote more time and energy to something even bigger than commerce, our planet, is what you wrote. Did you see yourself leaving the business world behind for good when you did that?
Yeah, I'd passed the CEO torch to my president at the time. I took on this role as the chair, and now I'm back. I've been back for 2 years. It's actually my favorite phase of the company. But at the time, I did think that it was a completely different chapter. I had been CEO for a long time. So I think in terms of conservation and also film now, I think it's always going to be a part of what I do. Obviously, I can't go on the ground and do some of the things I was doing in Echoes from Eden, but I can continue to support the films as they develop. It's a pleasure to be able to speak as a business leader now. Like now that I'm an active CEO and continue to spread this message. I feel also for folks like Jane that invested time in our film and in me that we got to speak also, and also speak on behalf of those conservationists like Paul Rosley and so on that are looking for people in business to support them. And so I think that experience of having put in my own money and seen all of these projects, not one, all of them just really blossom with a bit of support is something that that's a message I want to spread to other people that have made money in business and tech.
Was it a struggle for you, though, personally, to sort of put the conservation? Because my understanding is you I guess, transferred most of the existing projects to Rewild,
yes.
DiCaprio's organization. How much of a struggle was that for you personally to sort of think, okay, well, this chapter of being full-time conservation is behind me. I have to go back and fix the company essentially and take it to the next level. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think it's in a strange way because I invested in those 10 projects. A lot of them were close to kind of completing. Some of them had a year left. Some of them had a few more years, but that initial chapter had sort of a logical conclusion with the current project. So in order to do another round, I definitely wouldn't be able to be back at the company. But I think this first set of projects, I learned a lot from, and I'm still learning a lot from. And sometimes you need to do something, put something out into the world, and then spend some time like absorbing it instead of rushing to do yet another set. And so I'm actually grateful. From the conservation lens, that I can sort of step back from it and actually just enjoy the films coming out, continue to speak about it. But I do think that there will be more conservation projects in the future. We funded a few smaller ones with Rewild, one in Madagascar, and of course Juma's projects. But yeah, I think it'll be another few years before we can do another large fund. But I think having learned a lot from the first experience, we'll do it in a more evolved way.
I guess you have to get the Lightspeed share price
Got to
up,
get the
and then you
Lightspeed
can
share
sell
price
some
up.
shares.
Yeah, exactly.
So how would you say this experience inspired you and shaped you as a benefactor, but also how did it change you as a chief executive officer of a company, of a public company?
I do think this whole experience completely re-energized me. I didn't leave Lightspeed because I felt burnt out. I wanted my president to have an opportunity to be the CEO, and I wanted to try my hand at being the chair. But I do love being more in the operations than on the board. I think it's an interesting experience to come back after 2 years, having not expected to do so, and then realize how special it is. Because maybe for the first 17 years, you start to really see things through the lens of the challenges and some of the interpersonal things. I came back and saw it with a whole new passion. So this was a real blessing for my new experience at the company, and I think that being able to test and be able to grow and be able to test my leadership in completely different field, and being humbled again of not knowing what I was doing, first in conservation, then not knowing anything about film, and finding some success in both. It just gave me new energy for new directions at Lightspeed. It's a very different chapter for us. I feel like some of it is a lot of learning as well, and so it's just in a mode of a growth mindset of that shift, that the company needed.
Okay. There are a lot of sobering reflections. We've talked about them in the book about how fragile and threatened some of these places are. You say near the end of the book, quote, "This is not the time to give up. We know what works. We've seen it in action. I've come to believe that optimism is not naive. It's necessary." You sound optimistic and hopeful. Is that realistic?
So my favorite quote of Jane's is, "Hope is just wishful thinking without action." So when you go to these projects, or you see people doing a beach cleanup locally, or you see people taking action, whether it's an initiative, for climate, or an initiative for nature, action creates more hope, right? And when you see it, you realize now is not the time to give up. You have to invest in action. You can't just be brought down by that overall impending despair that we can't do anything. It's just not true. It's just not true, because there's so much out there that's pristine, nature to protect. There's so much that can be restored. I think that people think that we lost the battle of the Amazon. The Amazon is 80% intact. There's so much left in the major megadiverse forests. In Canada, I think our government's doing some really good, they've had some really good announcements lately on the 2030, which is protect 30% of the country by 2030. It's real commitments. I think Canada can show the world how it's done in terms of the preservation of nature. And conservation is the frontline fight against climate change. I think that sometimes when we feel overwhelmed by the climate change challenge, we should think about conservation and the protection of nature and the utilization of nature-based solutions as the thing that's the most effective. Let's stop trying to pull carbon out of the sky with machines. It's just, we'll never scale that. But mangroves and restored forests and doing agriculture and forestry in ways that pull carbon we can get trillions of megatons of carbon pulled out of the not trillions of megatons pulled out of the atmosphere just from nature-based solutions. So not too late for anything. Nature can heal. It can resurge.
Do you think there's no point in some of these decarbonization efforts, like the machines you talk about?
I think it's all interesting technology. I don't want to discourage anybody, but it's not going to scale fast enough. And if we're going to invest in solutions like that, and it needs time to scale, we need to do the nature-based stuff now. That stuff can buy us 5 to 10 years. And I think that we're doing that in this country. I've seen efforts around agriculture, around forestry, and around restoration, especially partnering with Indigenous people, that are very positive. We just need to do much, much more of it.
Okay. There seems to have been a slide of interest in environmental protection driven by political and economic pressures, particularly south of the border. In Canada, some people are worried that the effort to speed up pipeline development could set things back here. Are you worried about that? And what would you say if you were sitting across from Mark Carney? What would be your advice to him?
Yeah, we've felt that very much in trying to find a home, streaming home for Yinuni. It's just been a very difficult time to tell an environmental story. I mean, it's just, folks are scared by the climate, and I think that what I would say to Mark is we've got to have our own path on this, and I think that Canadians prioritize this. It has to be a priority, and nature's not a partisan thing either. It's foundational for all of us. Down south, Republican presidents were the leaders that created all the national parks. They created the Environmental Protection Agency. Nixon did. This is a shared resource, a shared future. It should never be partisan. And here in Canada, we have a unique ability, just given the natural wealth and given our ability to protect a lot of pristine marine and terrestrial ecosystems, to really lead, and I think that we aren't there yet, but we could be there and should be there, especially as we continue to develop our economy. We can do that in a way that really is a model.
I'll leave us off with one last question for you,
Yeah.
Dax. What can business leaders learn from your experience?
I think business leaders should think about stepping up in this regard. I know that other business leaders that have, there's no way to get the admiration of your kids more and your grandkids more than doing something for nature, because younger generations, unlike probably us, Sean, I don't think we grew up thinking the world is going to be a much worse place than our parents, but kids grow up that way. So I think it's an investment in nature is one for future generations. I think it's going to outlast our companies. It's going to outlast all kinds of governments, of course, even maybe some countries. It's just something that you as somebody who's been successful, it's an important way to be able to give back in whatever way you can, and actually set an example.
Great. Dax, thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're out of time. We have to leave it there. So with this next session, we're going to go deeper in the business of net zero and how senior business leaders are evolving their climate strategies. Joining us for this conversation is Tanya Lagrasta, Global Head of Sustainability for Colliers, Andrew Gordon, General Counsel of Corporate Secretary for Toyota Canada, and moderator Jordan Chitley, editor of Drive and Work Life at the Globe and Mail. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Sean and Dax. That was really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. We're actually going to take a slight change in this schedule, and we're going to talk about adaptation with our expert, Dr. Blair Feltmate, head of the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo. Welcome, Blair.
Nothing personal to Dax.
All right, so I'm going to start with a big question.
Okay.
Are we going to be able to turn this around? Are we going to be able to somehow turn back the clock and change the climate? Because when you look at it, we use more oil now and we produce more greenhouse gas than we did 30 years ago.
Yeah, so by turn this around, you mean climate, you're talking about climate change?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the answer is no. Basically, climate change has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen. What we can do we can work to mitigate the discharge of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, which will slow the rate of change, and we should do that for sure. But there really at this point is no going backwards on climate change. And you're quite correct in reference to, do we use more oil or more petroleum product today than we did in the past? The answer is yes. For example, if you go to 1995, when the first COP meeting was held, the Conference of the Parties. At that point in time, the world, and the direction for COP, amongst other goals, was to reduce dependence on fossil fuels, oil. And at that time, the world used about 70 million barrels of oil a day. If you forward project, as the International Energy Agency has, to 2028, which will be COP33, which right away there's a message in that. We went from 1 to COP33. At COP33, the projections are the world will use about 107 million barrels of oil per day. In other words, 50% higher than the original, what was being used at the original COP meeting. And one of the underlying factors that's driving this more than anything is increasing population on the planet. The world's population right now changes net by about 8,000 people per hour. Every single hour, if you subtract deaths from births, there's 8,000 more people on the planet, which if you multiply that out, it comes to about 70 million new people on the planet every single year, which means by 2037, 2038, somewhere in that zone, we're going to have another 1 to 1.1 billion people on the planet on top of the 8.1 billion people we currently have, and they all have to be fed, housed, clothed, educated, and they're going to demand energy. And a lot of those people are moving from developing regions of the world where it's too hot, too wet, uninhabitable, to developed areas in the country where their personal carbon footprint will go up. And then, by the way, if all those points haven't depressed you enough, beyond that, climate change is actually driving climate change independent of or on top of the use of petroleum product on the planet. For example, and I won't go into too much detail on it, but over the last 40 to 45 years, we've lost about 40 to 45% of ice coverage in the Arctic. And that creates a positive feedback loop of warming, because when you have the bright surface of snow and ice and sunlight hits it, about 80% of that energy radiates back into space. But once you start heating things up, which happened with the burning of fossil fuels, you go from the bright surface of snow and ice to the dark surface of water. When sunlight hits the dark surface of water, only about 20% of that energy radiates back up, reflects back up into space, and the rest of the energy stays in the system, causing warming. The more warming you get, the more snow and ice that melts, so it's a positive feedback system. We have methane releases, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, coming from the melting of permafrost. So the more permafrost that melts, the more methane released. The more methane that released, the more warming you get, the more permafrost that melts. And then through a slightly more complicated pathway, over the last 40 to 45 years, we've lost about 16 to 18% of the algae in the surface layer of the ocean, called the epilimnion. And this creates another positive feedback system whereby climate change is driving climate change. So, should we work to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions to slow down this process? The answer is yes, but we need to learn to adapt, and we need to learn to adapt very, very rapidly, because the extreme weather that we're experiencing on the planet today is going to get more extreme going forward, guaranteed.
So when did you decide that adaptation was the thing you really wanted to look at, and how did you decide, or how did you come to that decision?
About 18 years ago or something like that, 18, 19 years ago, I happened to meet with a very famous climate scientist by the name of James Lovelock, founder of Gaia theory. And we ended up becoming quite close friends. And it was Jim Lovelock then. He was 87 at the time. He finally died at 103, but he was 87 back then. I invited him to Canada to speak and hosted him around events like this. And he was the one that, after spending a week with him and getting very close to him, who convinced me that climate change was here to stay. And when I looked around Canada at the time, and Prime Minister Harper was the Prime Minister back then, I said, well, what is Canada doing on adaptation? What are we doing to adapt to climate change extreme weather risk? Because quite frankly, any discussion about climate change, it was all on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, 99% of the time. But there was nothing being done on adaptation to prepare us for the extreme weather that was here now and the more extreme weather that was coming. And I said, well, that's what I want to work on. So that's when I transitioned to focus pretty much all my attention on preparing the country for extreme weather.
Can you give us some examples of what you mean by adaptation?
Yeah, so basically there are 10 perils that are getting more challenging in Canada over time due to basically climate change and warming of the atmosphere. With warming of the atmosphere, there's more energy in the system. So when weather occurs, there's more veracity attached to it because there's more energy there that has come from the warming, or the energy that otherwise would have escaped to outer space. It's held in the system by more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we have more energy applied to storms. Warmer air holds more moisture, for example. When we have precipitation events and warmer air overall, there's more water to come down over a shorter period of time with more veracity attached to it. But we have 10 perils that are affecting Canada to varying degrees and varying degrees at time in terms of extreme weather. And it's flood, drought, fire, hail, wind, snow load, permafrost loss, sea level rise, contraction of Arctic sea ice, and extreme heat. Those are the 10 perils that we're dealing with now, all of which are becoming more challenging. The most costly peril affecting Canada is flooding. And the expression of flooding, residential basement flooding, that's the #1 cost of climate change in Canada. Basements flooding is the #1 cost of climate change.
By costly, you mean to insurance companies and homeowners?
To insurance companies, to homeowners, and just, the total price tag attached to that. For example, and that's followed by wildfire. And but just to give you some of the numbers a little bit, not to keep hitting you with numbers, but from 1983 up to about 2008 in Canada, if you looked at the catastrophic loss insured claims for Canada, the amount of money insurers pay out for floods or fires or windstorms or hailstorms, those types of things, we were very much in the zone of about them paying out in 2025 dollars, about $400 to $700 million per year. That's what the insurers could count on paying out in claims for those events. From 2009 onwards, everything changed. Whereas from 2009 to the present, the catastrophic loss claims have now gone to about $2.8 to $2.9 billion per year. And the culprit driving most of the upward bend in that curve is too much water in the wrong place, flooding, as I mentioned. In 2024, we had our worst year ever in terms of catastrophic loss claims, $9.2 billion paid out. Since I've been working on this file, maybe a simpler way to say it is this: since I've been working on this file, on the y-axis, when we plot the amount of money paid out each year by the insurers, and this is after correcting for inflation and wealth accumulation, so this is apples to apples, we've had to adjust the y-axis 4 times to add $1.5 billion, another $1.5 billion, another $1.5 billion, because things are getting worse and worse and worse. And we are very much faltering or not keeping up to preparedness for extreme weather in this country.
So what's an example, for staying on the flood theme? Is it like, do governments need to update the floodplain maps?
Amongst other things, the answer is yes. And the flood risk maps for Canada, that's a delineation of where water's going to go when the big storms hit, if you mapped it out here. For the average Canadian city, the flood risk maps are 20 to 25 years out of date as of the storms that are happening now, never mind forward projections on where extreme precipitations are going to be in the future. And this is a major omission because when you're building infrastructure like this building that has capital stock turnover that's on the order of 25, 50, 75 years, it's going to be here for a long time. Not only should you be looking at projections of flooding in this area as a place to build in the current state, but you've got to forward project that even if it's safe today, where is it going to be 25, 50, or 75 years down the road? So we don't have that data. Through a combination of Environment Climate Change Canada, Public Safety Canada, and Natural Resources Canada, and it's kind of the three of them kind of work together collectively on the floodplain maps. As of right now, a flood portal has been created in Canada for Canadians to access flood risk maps, but it's empty. There's nothing there. It doesn't function. The portal's there, but there's nothing in it. So it's like an empty box. And quite frankly, to be totally frank, the reason we don't have floodplain maps is because people don't want floodplain maps. In other words, as soon as you bring the flood risk maps up to date And that means, and you show for a certain neighborhood somewhere that a neighborhood that thought it was high and dry and not in harm's way relative to flooding, all of a sudden they're red tagged under new modeling of climate change as being in a flood risk zone. They go apoplectic because their homes have now been stigmatized, and they might have to sell at a discount. It's information nobody seems to want. But ignoring it is not a solution, because right now in Canada, 10% of homes, that's 1.5 million homes in this country at this moment, can no longer get insurance for their homes for flood damage in the basements. 1.5 million Canadians can't get flood insurance any longer. And that's because we simply haven't put the mechanisms in place to protect the homes. And by the way, homes in Canada over the last 12 years that are located in communities that experience catastrophic flooding, the house itself didn't have to flood, it just had to be in the wrong neighborhood. They sold for 8.1% less on average when you isolate for the effects of flooding on the sold price of homes, like a direct cause and effect relationship. So that's not theory or modeling, that's already happened. And we're about to release a report very shortly that shows spikes in claims, not for the area of property and casualty insurance, which would cover the kind of perils we've been talking about here, but that shows that climate change is very problematic for life and health insurance. What we see for about 16 or 17 cities across Canada that have experienced flooding, we've also isolated for the effects of flooding on mental or psychosocial health. And what we're seeing are large spikes in claims for medications to deal with psychosocial stress, drug claims in flood impacted zones. We're seeing a very large spike in claims for, matter of fact, an increase of 37% over a 1 year period for people that live in communities experience flooding, a 37% increase in claims for counseling services, psychological counseling, and large spikes in claims for lost time from work. And claims for drugs, counseling services, and lost time from work, these are all claims for life and health insurers, not property and casualty insurance. So up to now, more or less, the life and health insurers thought in the world of insurance, well, it's a P&C, a property and casualty insurance problem. Don't bug us about climate change. Well, this puts it front and square right on their doorstep. And by the way, and then I promise I'll take a break. This is like, when Robin Williams used to be interviewed with some comedian, he'd say hello, and then he'd take over for the next 4 hours. Anyhow, I'll turn it back to you. How's that?
That was great. I'm getting the sense there's a lot of other hidden costs to climate change in the system that we're probably not even accounting for.
I had a couple of graduate students sit down, and I said to them, all I want you to do is look through the headlines of newspapers, starting with the Globe and Mail. Look through the headlines of newspapers for the last 10 years and write down anything you see about the impacts of climate change, extreme weather risk that's relevant to a given industry sector. So mining, forestry, petroleum, utilities, hospitality, telecommunications, financial services, you name it. Just come up with what headlines do we see in the newspapers about flooding or wildfire or hail or wind or drought, whatever it is that might be affecting these industry sectors. And I thought we'd come up with a few. Holy macro. You could line the walls in this room with wallpaper with headlines that basically showed that climate change, no industry sector is immune from climate change or extreme weather risk. It's impacting them all. We talk about the insurance number. We talk about insurance quite a bit simply because we actually have numbers. But you should think about the increase in the catastrophic loss claims for the country, which are going up exponentially. You should think about that as a metaphor for risk that's in the system, because it's not like property and casualty insurance is getting hit hard, or the amount in terms of the claims payouts, and everybody else is perfectly fine. It's just that's the sector for which we actually have data. But the other sectors are also vulnerable.
And if there's one thing businesses don't particularly like, it's risk. Unknown risk in the system. We will get into that more in the next panel, actually, but I want to stay on, I want to keep talking about money a bit and how much money the government spends on reducing greenhouse gases versus how much money the government currently spends on adaptation. Can you shed some light on these numbers?
Yeah, from 2015, and these are the government of Canada's own numbers, by the way, from 2015 to 2024, the federal government of Canada invested $160 billion on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, either directly or through tax subsidies. $67 billion in direct investment towards energy efficiency of homes and transport and so forth. Another $93 billion in tax subsidies. So $160 billion in total, 2015 to 2024. Over exactly the same period of time, the federal government invested $6.7 billion in adaptation. The ratio of spending or investment of mitigation versus adaptation over that decade was 24-1. And I don't know what the exact number is that we should be spending on adaptation, but it's sure not, within the ratio of 24-1, that lopsided number. We need to be devoting far more resources to mobilizing adaptation on the ground.
So if you were talking to the government now, what would you suggest they spend that money on, even if you don't have the exact number?
I can tell you what's at the very top of the list for Canada, where we can, and I talk to the government a lot, and where we can get the most bang for the buck to take risk out of the system relative to the expression of climate change. It deals with housing. And remember, I mentioned early on that the most expensive cost to Canada is residential basement flooding. For the average home, a homeowner could spend a long weekend for usually less than $500, and that which does not require great technical expertise. If you're somewhat handy, it's good, but you don't have to be a carpenter. For the average home, you can engage activities around that home over a long weekend that, let's say, on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being the worst from basement flooding, you can take the average home from an 80 down to a 30, just like that. And through simple directives, and I'll describe a few in a second. What we need to do is get that information into the hands of homeowners to help homeowners help themselves engage activities to lower their vulnerability to basement flooding. And just to give you one or two examples of how simple it can be, let's say, for example, you have a home where there's a sump pump in the basement. So below the basement floor, there's what looks like a bucket with a pump in it that if water gets into the basement, it goes into that bucket, the pump turns on and it pumps water outside. So that's a good thing. One of the things you want to do before the storm hits is check that sub pump to make sure it actually works. Pour a bucket of water in the sump well to see, does the pump turn on and pump water outside? If it does, that's good. If it doesn't, you want to figure out what the problem is, fix it before the storm. Most people find out their sub pump doesn't work when they walk down into 3.5 feet of sewer water in their basement. And by the way, the average cost of a flooded basement in Canada right now is about $56,000. So putting a little bit of effort, as simple as that's one of about 15 things you can do around the house to lower the probability you'll end up with a flooded basement. Disconnecting the downspouts that come from the eaves trough system. If that goes into the ground, into the weeping tile system, in most cases you can disconnect that, put an elbow on it, direct water a meter or two from the house, and that can contribute to not having a flooded basement. And just maybe one more quick example. With the sub pump in the basement, you also want to make sure that you have battery supply or external energy supply to run it, because the time you need the sub pump to work is when the big storms hit. Very often when the big storms hit, the electricity goes out. So the time you actually need it to do something, it's not available. But for a $500 kit and a little bit of technical expertise, you can have a battery on that system that will run the sub pump up to 48 to 72 hours. So a lot of these things, there's a whole series of actions like that when they're presented to homeowners, and this is an area I'm quite involved in. At the Intact Center, we produce infographics, single-page depictions of the actions you can take around your house that you can understand in 60 seconds what it's telling you how to protect your home. When people are given that infographic, and we've tested this a lot with Red Cross and others, 70% of people will take at least 2 actions within 6 months to protect their home from flooding or wildfire. In other words, people will act to protect their homes when they know what to do. The reason they're not doing so is because they just don't know what to do.
So is a lot of it an information campaign that the government should be engaging in? Or
Exactly.
are there also like bigger level things that the government should be doing itself?
They should be doing, but they should also be doing engaging activities at the community level that are more encompassing. for the homeowner, wherever your home is, it is. So in that case, you want to protect it through these activities from its vulnerability to flooding and or wildfire if you live in forested or grassland regions. But at the larger level of government, and through a combination of federal, provincial, and municipal governments, you also want to, for example, delineate with the flood risk maps, bringing them up to date, where is water going to go when the big storms hit, and then look at how you can utilize berms, diversion channels, holding ponds, cisterns, bioswales, permeable surfacing within communities to send water to safe locations and keep people and property out of harm's way. So that can be done at the community level, but it needs support to engage that activity to figure out, how do we de-risk the system. And by the way, the return on investment for adaptation, and this is very well established by the Global Commission on Adaptation, the World Resources Institute, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and our own research, for $1 invested in adaptation, we realize generally $2 to $10 in avoided losses per decade in damage that now didn't occur because we prepared for the flood or the fire or the hailstorm or the windstorm or whatever it might be.
Moving from flooding to heat,
Yeah.
I believe heat is the most deadly cause of climate change at this point. So what should the government be doing along those lines to save some lives of Canadians? I'm thinking of vulnerable people in certain big cities, maybe cities that don't have a lot of trees in certain neighborhoods.
Yeah, so heat is the issue that probably, it may end up being heat that turns the corner for Canada and getting really serious about addressing climate change. Because with flooding and wildfires, at least in this country, it's not the same all over the world, but at least in this country, when floods and wildfires occur, very few people, if any, die. It's usually in the order of 0, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people. And I don't mean to sound indelicate, like one person dying is one person too many. But basically the costs are financial. However, with extreme heat, it's a whole new ballgame. People can die, and they can die in very large numbers due to extreme heat. In 2021 in British Columbia, we had 619 people die prematurely due to extreme heat. In 2018 in Quebec, we had 86 people die prematurely due to extreme heat. So with extreme heat, the costs aren't financial so much as they are social or impacts on people, ultimately causing their death. And but for Canada as a whole, for the average Canadian city, between now and 2050 to 2080, the average Canadian city will realize an increase in maximum summer temperatures of about 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Toronto, the city of Toronto right now where we're sitting, taps out in the summer at about 36, 37 degrees Celsius. By 2050 to 2080, that's going to go to about 40 to 41 degrees Celsius, the maximum summer temperature. And the number of hot days per summer over 30 degrees Celsius in this region, it's about 17, 18 days per summer. In this area, that's going to go to about 45 to 55 days per summer over 30 degrees Celsius. For the average Canadian city, they're going to realize a doubling, tripling, or in some cases like Windsor, Ontario, the number of hot days per summer over 30 degrees Celsius is going to quadruple. So the heat is coming, and it's coming heavy. And the group in the population that's most vulnerable to extreme heat, it's the elderly, people over 70 years of age, living alone, who are financially challenged. And basically financially challenged, that's another way of saying they don't have air conditioning. And so we have to make access to cooling a fundamental human right. The same way you have access to warmth in winter is a fundamental human right to keep people safe and out of harm's way. Well, you can die or suffer just as much from extreme heat as extreme cold. And ultimately, and we know to a large extent what needs to be done with apartment buildings and homes and so forth to make it so that they're less impacted by extreme heat. You can have glazing on windows. You can have mechanical shutters over windows, awnings over windows, flow-through cooling in the design of homes to help cool them. But ultimately, that buys you a couple of days when an extreme heat event is happening, and then the house will start to heat up, period. So ultimately, you're going to need a heat pump / air conditioner. In the summer, a heat pump's really an air conditioner. We have to make that available to virtually everybody. They need at least one cool room in their house where they can get away from the extreme heat. And for example, in British Columbia, following the 619 deaths in 2021, they actually distributed, by ways of means testing, 8,000 air conditioners, 5,000 BTU, to help people, not suffer further when the extreme heat hits.
You spend a lot of time talking to institutional investors.
Yeah.
What are their concerns?
Well, where they're starting to turn, I would say in the last 3 to 5 years, institutional investors, or in other words, pension funds, investing in companies. Up until now, when they talked about climate change, most of what they focused on was transition risk, getting off carbon, and what does this mean to our company, or what does this mean to the companies that we're investing in, and ultimately what impact might that have on share price, et cetera. So all proper concerns. Where they haven't been is asking questions, and they're just starting to, about how flood, wildfire, wind, hail, permafrost loss, snow load, whatever it might be, how perils of different types may impact the operations of the companies that they invest in, and ultimately, by extension, share price. So institutional investors should be looking at, when they're investing in companies, one of the questions they should be asking a company, an investee company, is, have you done an analysis of your vulnerability to climate change and physical climate change and extreme weather risk? What was the process you engaged to determine your vulnerability? And then the question is, and what have you done to mitigate the risk, to address that risk? And the way to do that, personally, in my opinion, is, and we've done a bit of work in this area, is we would bring chief operating officers together, maybe a dozen to 2 dozen in a given industry sector, and you could map out to them and say, these are the perils that are going to become problematic for your in the regions in which you operate. And then they'll say, if that's the scenario, if that's what we can expect going forward, here are our key vulnerabilities, but here are the actions we could take to make it such that when these events hit, we can minimize our impacts, the impact to us. So the institutional investor should be able to ask those questions of the investee company, and the investee company should be prepared with answers to explain how they've addressed these growing risks.
We're almost out of time, but I just have one more question. This has been a pretty unsettling conversation, full of lots of scary numbers.
I'm not making this stuff up, by the way. Yeah.
But what is one takeaway you would have for the audience? Maybe there's a note of hope here.
Well, to a very large extent, we know, relative to expressions of climate change and extreme weather risk, to a very large extent for this country, we know what the problems are, and we know where they're going to manifest. The problem is we're not applying known solutions to known problems nearly quick enough. Are we doing it? The answer is yes, but we're sort of on a slight incline line in terms of mobilizing preparedness. Extreme weather is getting worse faster. The dispersion between these lines is increasing. We've got to bring it together. And the number one thing that's being missed in Canada by far is the lack of sense of appreciation for the need to act with urgency to mobilize adaptation today. Every day we don't adapt is a day we don't have. And let's not wait for the ultimate disaster to hit before we move into action.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blair Feltmate.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short networking break right now, and when we come back, we'll be talking more about the business of being on the road to net zero. Thank you. All right, welcome back. I hope everyone had a drink and a chance to chat. Reducing emissions isn't like flipping a switch. It's a long and winding road where companies are weighing countless decisions and the interests of various stakeholders, while also remembering that they need to remain profitable. As a result, plans are constantly evolving. Joining me today to talk about this is Tanya Lagrasta, Global Head of Sustainability for Colliers. and Andrew Gordon, General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for Toyota Canada. All right, so if we can start off just broad, tell us a little bit about some of the bigger parts of your company's sustainability plans. Tanya, do you want to start?
Sure. So we actually just refreshed our sustainability strategy last year on the backs of our business really evolving. So most know Colliers is a commercial real estate business, but we've been growing quite a bit through acquisition, and we are now a very sizable investment management business. And the other leg of our organization is an engineering and design business. And so we recently just acquired a engineering business in Europe, placing Colliers in one of the top 30 largest engineering companies. And so on the backs of that, we've had to take a step back and revisit what was material to our business and where we should focus. And so we definitely, the built environment sits at the intersection of some pretty critical things that will be impacted by climate change, and so environmental sustainability, decarbonizing our business and helping our clients do the same is very, very central to that across all areas. But the two other components are really around something that has emerged in our last materiality assessment, which is around responsible AI and how it is that we're adopting that. So from a governance perspective, and responsible AI, not only on information security and kind of the ethical pieces, but also how that adoption is going to impact the environment and communities. And then in the middle is workplace experience. So I know that there's been a lot of political meandering around diversity and inclusion and equity and all of those wonderful things. So that is also a really important, because at our core, we, yes, are involved in the built environment, but we are professional services. So those are some of the key areas that we've been focused and continue to focus on.
Andrew, obviously Toyota makes a lot of hybrids and is big into electrification, but you guys also have a whole manufacturing and facility side. So do you want to talk a bit about your sustainability plans?
Yeah, absolutely. So globally, Toyota since 2015 has had a plan to be net zero by 2050. And sort of, obviously the politics changes time to time, but we've really tried hard at a global level to just keep working that plan consistently. Here in Canada, really it breaks down into two areas. We've got our buildings and our facilities, and then we've got the vehicle fleet. As you mentioned, we're big into electrification. So on the facility side, we, just as an example, for years and years we had a parts warehouse for Eastern Canada, so Manitoba East, that was based in Scarborough, where our head office is. We built a new state-of-the-art warehouse to replace it about 5 years ago, which is out in Clarington, so a little further east along the 401. And that building is certified as a net zero facility and is LEED Gold. And so we've done, and everything we build now at every facility is carbon neutral, and we aim for LEED Gold. So that facility, just again as an example, it's got solar panels on the roof. It's got a system to retain snow melt and rainfall to use in all of the toilets. It's got glass that tints automatically to try to manage the temperature inside. You can tint the glass on warm days, open it up on cool days. LED lightings, and then geothermal heating. So that overall the building is pretty state of the art. And a couple weeks ago, we were really happy to announce that despite all the tariffs and various other challenges right now, we're going to invest $300 million in Canada to build 2 more new warehouses. So we have a very outdated warehouse in Vancouver right now. We're going to replace that with 2 new warehouses, one in Vancouver, one in Calgary. Those will both be carbon neutral and LEED Gold. And we're going to build a new head office in Scarborough for the sales business, which is the company that I work for specifically. We've been there on the 401 for 60 years. We're going to build a brand new building on the same site that'll be carbon neutral. So on the facility side, we're very committed to the neutrality. On the fleet side, obviously, yeah, it's been a very long journey. We introduced the first hybrid, the Prius, 26 years ago. It's been a long journey to sort of sell people on the idea of hybrids. They've definitely caught on the last few years, but we're very much committed as well to plug-in hybrids and to battery electric vehicles.
Now, there's obviously a lot of choices you have to make. How did you guys decide where to put the money and that like what your sustainability plans are sort of the right plans for now. Tanya, do you want to start?
Sure. So for us, I mean, I think we've got an incredible opportunity to lead by example, right? No one wants a professional service firm or trusted advisor coming in and walking one direction and advising the clients to do something else. So for us, really focusing in on where and how we operate, and then using that as an example. So, in our last strategy, and it's something that continues, we made a commitment to occupy space that is certified to well-being and sustainability standards, because this is something that is an easy way. It's kind of like the, EcoStar rating when you go to buy an appliance, right? The quickest way to know is you look for those badges and you look for certain numbers. And so for us, the buildings we occupy lead by example, but then also share learnings that we have gained as tenants in space that we don't own, and bringing that experience on how to navigate it and what we're experiencing into our owners, and those conversations that we have with them. So right now, I mean, Collier's, full transparency, I mean, we've only been at this sustainability strategy thing since maybe 2020. So we're fairly new, but that's not a surprise. I mean, the built environment has been quite a bit of a laggard, which is very shocking, but it has been. And so we're still honestly in the place of trying things out and figuring out, and I know we'll get into this as we talk about just very precisely net zero decarbonization and how we are compared to where we started. So decarbonization is a key focus, and understanding how we're going to navigate both the physical risk exposure as well as transition risk, but then also looking at investing in the opportunity to grow our business through how we service our clients as they also try to navigate this transition.
Yeah. Andrew, is Toyota when they're deciding on sustainability plans, is it all about like looking for the most bang for your buck to reduce carbon, or what? I don't know. What are you guys thinking?
No, I think it's, especially on the fleet side, on the vehicles, I think it's really about trying to balance both where we know we need to go, and again, there's a plan to be carbon neutral by 2050, with what customers want. I mean, we still are in the business of trying to sell cars that people want to buy, but you can shape that to a certain degree. So again, the Prius is a great example. When we launched the Prius 26 years ago, hybrids were not well known. It was a technology that a lot of people were kind of nervous about, and there was no natural demand for it. It was a technology the company thought would make sense. It's incredibly fuel efficient. It's a smoother drive, and the company saw opportunity there to sort of market a new technology. And then it took 25 years of gradual, incremental marketing and selling people that idea before it really caught on. I remember my parents for years wouldn't get a hybrid because they thought it would be like, well, how does it work, and is it going to be complicated? And I think it's the same now with plug-in hybrids and with battery electric vehicles. I think again, it's a long plan. We've been criticized in the past for being perceived as, I think, laggards on battery electric vehicles, but we now have launched a RAV4 sized BEV called the BZ, which is selling incredibly well. We have 2 more arriving right now, so 3 on offer, and then the all-new Highlander in the fall will be battery electric only. So all of a sudden, we actually have a pretty substantive fleet of battery electric vehicles. And same as with hybrids, I think we're trying to match and kind of get a little bit ahead of consumer demand, and make sure that we're giving customers what they want while still going in the right direction.
Well, I didn't say the word laggards. You did, but
I probably shouldn't have said that.
It did seem, and I think this is at the heart of this conversation. It did seem that there was a very specific direction Toyota seemed like it was always going to go in deciding on going the hybrid route. In that, like, if a lot of people can buy a hybrid car, are we actually going to reduce more carbon than if very few people can buy a fully electric car? Can you speak a bit to that decision, like 20 years ago?
20 years ago, for sure. And again, I think this is all a function of time. Like, I think we very much believe, I think the industry believes, the industry will go to battery electric vehicles. I mean, it's a great technology, and Toyota's all in on battery electric vehicles. There's no question about that, but there's a question of pace of adoption. And so I think hybrids right now and over the past number of years have made a lot of sense. Toyota's a very large company. We built, I think, 11.8 million cars globally last year. And batteries are difficult to build. There's a lot of raw materials. The plants are pretty intensive. We're investing heavily. We just opened a brand new plant in North Carolina $14 billion and 14 assembly lines to build nothing but batteries. And that's actually supplying batteries to our plant in Cambridge where the RAV4 hybrid is built. So we're investing very much in technology, but we still find that our limit is actually how many batteries we can build or acquire. And if you have a limited number of batteries, it actually makes a lot of sense in some ways to invest in hybrids. The numbers we have to throw around, the battery, and again, we're all in on BEVs, and so the volumes are going up. But the numbers are, if you take one BEV, that battery pack, which is pretty intense, you could take that same battery pack and have 6 plug-in hybrids or 90 hybrids. So look at a hybrid Corolla. If you're looking at a gas Corolla versus a hybrid Corolla, well, that's 90 fewer pure gas cars we're selling. So that's been part of the math in the past. Yeah. But again, our plan is increasing volumes of ZEVs going forward. And just as an example, because I love to mention this, because it's a great stat. So we just finished the first quarter of the year. More than 2/3 of the cars we sold last quarter in Canada had an electric motor of some sort, whether hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or BEV. So less than 1/3 of what we sold was a pure gas engine.
I talk to people often and they're like, I'm never going to move off my gas car. I'm like, really, you should test a hybrid because there is absolutely no difference to your lifestyle in most of the hybrids that are on the road. Tanya, I want to get back to you. How have the Colliers plans changed for sustainability over the time, and sort of why have you made those changes?
Sure. So I would say the changes that we're navigating at the moment, where we're seeing, I would say the biggest evolution is within the environmental sustainability pillar specifically, and that is really around to net zero, not to net zero, by when, to decarbonize, to be carbon neutral. And so a lot of that has been the organization really getting better at data, which in some markets is easy to come by in terms of building data, and in other markets, very, very challenging. If you're a tenant in a space and you're on the sustainability team and you're trying to understand your emissions associated with the space that you occupy, that can be really, really challenging in some markets. And so for us, a lot of what we've had to build plans on has been on assumptions. Assumptions of data based on what's available in the market. And so what's helping to inform our strategy and where we focus and what we prioritize really has come through more data, us getting better at the quality and the completeness of the data. And so for us, we originally started out with a proper net zero target, and then we have moved that to a carbon neutral target for our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 2030. We currently do not have a long-term 2050 ambition. It's carbon neutral by 2030 for Scope 1 and Scope 2, and then we've got an SBTI target that's been approved to a 1.5 degree scenario, and that's for Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions for us. We're still figuring it out. Like, I'm working with one of the financial institutions to help us do some macroeconomic modeling of what it's going to cost us to get there and how best to deploy those dollars, whether it's offsets, quality offsets, RECs, to walk back a commitment, to double down, to set a long-term target. And so, again, much of that is just constantly reshaping itself. And sometimes we take 5 steps forward and we take 3 steps back, and then we go left and then we go back right. But I think the key takeaway for organizations who are not yet on the road is to understand that it's not going to be linear, and that as long as you continue to monitor and manage it, and you continue to challenge your organization to get better at the data, and as long as you can glean insights and you're transparent with that, there's permission for it not to be perfect, so long as you continue to show progress. And so I think that's been our journey to date. Is we know it's not perfect, but we know we're moving in the right direction, right? The upper quartile of the graph is where we want to go.
Can you just share an example of Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3? Because I think it'll help give an idea of the complexity of actually reducing carbon emissions.
Yes. So for us, I mean, electricity that's consumed by us and fleet, right, is a big factor. So for us, if we're going to even come close to hitting our SBTI target, we need 80%, and this is an interesting one that has also evolved. First we said, we have to fully electrify our fleet. And then we're like, ooh, how do we actually do that? And a lot of the reservation is becoming less about the technology in the vehicle itself and more about the charging infrastructure. And so here's where we say, okay, well, we own assets, manage assets. How do we work to make it make sense for owners to invest in having EV chargers on site? And then when we looked at our own corporate goals and focus, at least 80, what the math then told us was that at least 80% of the miles driven needed to be non-gas. So now that takes us from fully electrify to now electrification, like a full EV or hybrid are options, in particular in markets where the charging infrastructure isn't in place. And so those ones there become a bit challenging because we don't have direct operational control in most instances. And when it comes to being practical in our approach, when I met with a question of, well, we service this remote area, and if Tanya, like, we don't want to blame you for why we can't do our business in that area. I don't want the finger pointed at me. So that's where it starts to get a little bit tricky, because sustainability is meant to help the business be more resilient, not to create obstacles or barriers to what it's intended to do. And so the third bucket is around our Scope 3 emissions, which for us presents also an interesting challenge, because more than 90% of our Scope 3 emissions come from the assets that we manage, and we have some influence, right? As trusted advisors, we can bring solutions to our clients and help them to decarbonize their assets. But if they don't want to invest, all we can do is advise. And to have something like that account for more than 90% of your emissions is an opportunity for us to solve. Some might characterize it as a problem, but it is an opportunity. And then the rest is our purchased goods and services and employee kind of commuting type of stuff. But 90% all in that basket is where we, like others, find it to be a bit tricky to want to have a target against and genuinely want to see it move in the right direction, but are a little bit limited in terms of our ability to control that.
I did a story last year on sustainability in the ski industry, which has nothing to do with either of the sectors you're doing, but they can do so much to electrify the chairlifts, let's say, and all the facilities, the hotels and everything. But most of the people who go to any place out west from Toronto fly there. The ski resorts can't do anything about the airplanes. So it's a big, I don't know, it's very complex. Andrew, sorry for that tangent. Andrew, is there a business case to be made for sustainability these days? Like outside of on the fleet side, but also on your buildings and your facilities? Because you guys are investing a lot in these net zero facilities.
No, I think there absolutely is. I think, but on a number of levels. I think our customers expect it. Like again, the voice of the customer is important in all this. I think they expect that we're doing all that we can to do these things. Energy is expensive. So even though there's a lot of, I look at our warehouse in Clarington, there's a very high upfront cost, all those things we've done in that building, but we plan to have that building there for at least 30 years. And over that time, that there's a strong business case in investing in that and saving on energy costs going forward. So I think there's absolutely a business case for sustainability.
Tanya?
I would agree. And I think where we as sustainability leaders have our work cut out for us is helping to shift the conversation. And I think we've been stuck in an ROI trap. And, if anyone asks you to evidence the direct causation and correlation to, the same way we look at the books from a financial perspective, it's complicated. And so for us, the challenge is helping the business see the long-term value creation side of things, and how companies who do this, they do the right things and they do them well, and they don't, I was on a panel not too long ago and someone said, is sustainability one of your strategic pillars within your corporate business, like your business strategy? And I said, no, and I don't want it to be. Because it's, sustainability, some people would say like, success, sustainability is a spoke on the strategy wheel. It still becomes my problem to solve for the organization. And that's not what we want. So what I like to do is whenever I go into an organization, I don't try to argue to get sustainability as one of the spokes. I just take their lovely strategy wheel and then I put a sustainability circle around it. and I kind of give it a little bit of a hue, and I say, you need to look at the entirety of the business through the sustainability lens, and let me help you understand how, by doing that, it will make our business much more resilient, much more agile, and shifting the conversation as well from ROI to long-term value creation, also helping to shift the conversation in a way that has people thinking similarly. Like from a climate perspective, it was all about mitigation. We have a chance to save the world from this climate risk. And now the conversation has swiftly changed to adaptation and the reality that this is happening upon us, and those who are going to succeed are going to be the ones that are agile and understand how to adapt. So I would say those are two fundamental shifts that are happening, and the conversations that sustainability professionals need to facilitate at all levels within their organization.
Are you finding that customers, clients, tenants are willing to pay a premium for that now?
So it's interesting. That varies by market, I would say. I would say what we're actually seeing more of is a discount. And what I mean by that is clients, tenants, when they're looking at the space that they occupy, in particularly those that are in regulated spaces or have very big commitments, publicly traded, etc., they're now looking at the space that they occupy and they're saying, okay, from a sustainability perspective, we've got commitments on environment, we need to decarbonize, and we've got commitments to our people to be an inclusive, welcoming space. We cannot go into a building that is going to impact our ability to deliver on those commitments to our investors, shareholders, our ratings, our people. And so what we're seeing is kind of like this hidden discount that's happening in some markets, where a tenant might come in and say, give me an assessment, I need to move, I need new space, this is how much I'm going to pay, this is what the fit out. And so our broker teams go in and they do their traditional assessment. Then they say, we also want it analyzed through the sustainability lens. And so what we're finding is that in instances, I've worked on engagements where we've had maybe, good 15 or so great sites for the client that checked all the boxes: location, fit out, price point. And then when we did the ESG analysis, that list got cut in half. They weren't even considered, and they didn't even know that they were no longer in the running to be eligible for that business. So yes, just like my days in retail where we would do consumer surveys, people were like, I would be willing to pay a premium to have that cotton t-shirt ethically sourced, and then they realize it might cost them 20, 30, 40, 50% more. And they're like, yeah, maybe I'll just buy that one to send with my kid for their paint class. And so I would say, yes, there is data in the market that supports tenants have a willingness to pay a premium to be in a facility that will enable them to meet their sustainability goals. Is that data consistent out there across the globe? Even just in Canada, you go city by city, and that looks very different. I would say the more material risk to owners is them not making the short list because of their failure to have that performance in their building. And that is kind of, again, it's not a premium, it's not a discount, it's just you're not going to be considered. Will that translate into how much people are willing to pay or not? Potentially. I don't have a crystal ball left at home. But based on what we're seeing in the data, that's kind of how the landscape is shifting. I mean, there's progress being made in the Canadian and global valuations community, where we're starting to look at how this can actually influence the value of the asset, but we still have some work cut out for us on that front.
Andrew, what are you finding at Toyota? Do you find customers are willing to pay a premium? Like, obviously, the electrified vehicles, in some cases, are more expensive. Batteries are expensive. Like, there's a cost to Toyota to make the vehicles, but are you finding customers are willing to pay?
So it's a great question. It's been really interesting to see the impacts, because over the past, call it 18 months, in the battery electric vehicle space, we've seen some massive swings in policy. So at one point, the federal incentive for BEVs was taken away. And we did see, and I'm sure you've all read in the media, there was a marked decline in demand, and that showed up in the sales numbers for BEVs across all brands. The federal government announced their new auto strategy in February, and EVAP, the new EV incentive, came in as part of that. And again, if you read about the industry, you'll have read, and we've seen it. Demand did respond to that. Like, demand came back. As you said, these vehicles, the biggest cost is the battery pack. They're not cheap. It's quite expensive, which leads to pricing pressure on our side. And our customers are price conscious. Cars aren't cheap, and there's definitely a cost impact. But we've seen with the incentives that has stoked demand quite a bit. The other thing I'll mention, we've seen this over the past couple of weeks. The price of fuel has gone up considerably due to geopolitical events, and that has also stoked increased demand, because people are doing the math of, well, it's going to cost this much to fill up my car. A battery electric vehicle is going to make a lot more sense. So in some ways, I mean, as the math is changing on that quickly, and people are doing the math, I think, when they're going to buy a car.
Yeah, $2 a liter, or almost $2 a liter, changes the calculus when electricity prices overnight at home are staying the exact same. What are the risks of not taking action now and not decarbonizing? Andrew, I'll start with you.
I think there's multiple risks. I think again, it's trite.
Sorry, I should say risks to your business.
Yes, I was going to say there's clearly huge risks as a society. Again, I think that our Toyota, we always try to look at what the customer wants. And so for us, this is part of the way people want to go. We talked about incentives, gas prices going up. We feel like right now we need to offer our customers a choice of technologies to reduce their carbon footprints, whether that's for some customers a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, a battery electric. In BC, you can still buy a hydrogen vehicle, and we still invest in hydrogen. We're offering a number of pathways to keep advancing that. And I think the cost of not doing that is that the market is moving ahead relentlessly. And I think if you're not investing in that now, and some of our competitors aren't, then I think you're in danger of missing the market as it's moving. Apart from the fact that there is this societal pressure, I think, to do the right thing. Also, and I think our plans at Toyota, we try not to change them. You're always doing tactical changes short term, but politics will change. Things come, things go. Strategies have to, in the car business, like with buildings, it takes years and years to design a new car, get the supply chain set up. Like, it's a long lead time business. And so you sort of have to plan through all of that noise. And I think, given what we've heard about earlier today in terms of the impacts of climate change, what's happening, you need to make those long-term plans now to make sure that you're not missing the market.
Yes, similar to us. I mean, the reality is we need to do as much as we can to prepare for what's happening with the climate around us. And as a built environment, like, we've seen destruction firsthand around the globe as it relates to these kind of 1 in 100-year rains that are happening multiple times, right, in a season. And if we don't, I don't want to sound like cliche, like, if we don't do our part and we don't all lean in to this, that is just going to make things far worse of a scenario that we all have to adapt to. So for us, there's that piece, which is kind of macro, and some will say, especially those who don't really understand the science behind it, a little too philosophical. But then practically on the ground, we are seeing a lot of headlines, right? And we'll look to our neighbors to the south, where you'll see the headlines being one thing. And then when you read down into the second paragraph, you actually get a sense of what the true story is. And what we're seeing is this kind of tone that this doesn't matter, it's not important. But then even if you just look to the States, over the last couple of years, there's been several hundred city and state level regulations around climate that have moved forward. When you look at some of the financial costs that municipalities, even just in Canada, you look out west, they're putting a price on carbon, and they're going to start financially penalizing those who don't contribute to the solution. And so we expect to see more of that. And so those of us who are thinking through it long term and not getting caught in a 4-year kind of cycle trap will be the ones that hopefully bring the rest along for the ride. And hopefully we see more, sometimes you need mom and dad to, tap the stick, right? So we're going to see a little bit more of that, I would anticipate. But then it's also going to take organizations like Toyota, like Colliers, like some of the financial institutions, the bigger players in the market who have the resources to see through that noise and disruption, being able to evidence that this is good for business. And it's good for business because it's good for our communities, and the good old cliche, communities thrive in thriving communities. Like, we need to know that we're part of an ecosystem, and in order for us to be successful as for-profit organizations, we need to take care of the communities that we operate in and profit from. So it's a win-win. The challenge is getting leadership teams in varying organizations to see and understand the value behind that.
I think that's a really good point to bring up, because both your businesses have to think much longer term. Like, even the development of a car is going to be like, 6 years maybe, which is much longer than even a U.S. administration or a single U.S. administration. So, all right, we're coming to a close. So I just want to ask one more question. If you have one piece of advice for business leaders when they're setting a sustainability plan, what would it be? And Tanya, I'll start with you.
Not because I am one, but trust your CSOs, right? I would say that there are few individuals within an organization that really understand the depth and breadth of interconnectivity when it comes to your whole organization. Sustainability professionals tend to be that. I was talking outside, and people say, explain how you do your job. I'm like, I'm the footbridge between the silos. And so I know what's going on in every group, and that's not the case, and not everyone can say that within your organization. So executive teams, I would really implore them to really heed the advice and guidance of their sustainability teams, because they have that understanding of the ecosystem that is the organization, and then the macro ecosystem in which it's a part of. But then they also know the books, right? They know the data, they know the details, and trust that just because, speaking to this maybe a couple years ago, and it was to finance teams, like, we might not be able to show you the ROI in the same linear fashion that you would expect of somebody else, but you need to start opening the books up just a little bit more. And we've spent, not at Colliers per se, but I've been in organizations where we took way bigger chances and funding projects that were kind of half-baked, but we trusted our people in that space that this was going to be, this was a manageable risk to take. And so I think that's really what we have to do. And again, not at Colliers, because we're a different organization, but in organizations that do have a similar kind of succession cycle of their CEOs. I remember early days in some of my roles, yeah, but I only have a 4-year term. I'm going to take a risk, and the business is going to kind of take a financial hit, and then it's going to be 4 CEOs from now that's going to reap the rewards. I've got other priorities, and I got to, do some other things. So it's encouraging the business, again, where you might have that same cycle, to challenge them to think beyond their time and their tenure in the role. And connecting with boards, like if you're in a situation where you do have boards of directors, really working with them to help them understand the opportunity and the value of why this should be taken seriously.
Andrew, what would you say for one piece of advice?
I think, in a customer-facing business where we're selling things, to bring your customer along with you. I think, investing in educating your customer. At the end of the day, we still have to sell a product to a customer to be successful. And so educating your customer and trying to bring them along on what you're trying to do, I think is important.
We do have a few more minutes if anyone in the audience has a question for Tanya or Andrew. No, on the side there.
Thanks. I was on a stage with your sustainability people at the building show, Sharon and Ali Haas. So how do we bring this, how do we use the technologies, whether it's AI, whether it's smart buildings, to facilitate that carbon footprint, that recognition that we collected data to facilitate valuing it in the building space?
Yeah, especially for owners and operators, the data is critical. I was speaking with a gentleman who I think has left, but we were just talking about something, and this isn't like the most innovative technology, but like a BAS, right? Not having one in a building. There are lots of buildings that do not have that technology in place, and as a result, they're not as efficient as they can be from an energy consumption perspective. And the moment you start introducing technology and you start gathering that data, that's very, very powerful, and can, it's not going to get us all the way there. So I would say, a bit of a cautionary tale, AI, it's not this magical thing that's going to save us and we can just push a button and spend a bit of money. But it's really marrying that with experts in the industry that you're working in.
And I'll say Save on Energy has incentives that they can't give away the money fast enough
Yes.
to have network lighting controls, to have a building automation system that does that, whether it's with AI or others. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? All right, we will wrap it up from there. Tanya, Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.